Here you go.
Thank you. It looks good.
I'm glad. Have some more.
Yes, please.
The town of Millbrook was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody. It sat quietly between two hills, surrounded by golden fields that stretched endlessly under a sky that was almost always gray. The houses were small, the streets were narrow, and the people lived slow, quiet lives. Nothing exciting ever happened in Millbrook. Nothing ever changed. And for most of the people who lived there, that was perfectly fine. But for a little girl named Sarah Ellen Moore, Millbrook was not a place of peace. It was a place of pain. Sarah was born on a cold February morning, the third child of a woman who had never wanted children and a man who had never stayed long enough to be called a father. By the time Sarah was 5 years old, she had already learned the most painful lesson a child can learn, that love is not something you are given. It is something you have to find. And sometimes, no matter how hard you look, it is simply not there. Her mother, Margaret Moore, was not a cruel woman. She was simply a broken one. She had grown up in poverty herself, had never known warmth or kindness, and so she had nothing to give to the small bodies that depended on her. She fed them when she remembered. She clothed them in whatever she could find at the charity shops in town. But she did not hold them at night. She did not kiss their foreheads. She did not tell them that they were loved. Sarah's two older brothers, David and Thomas, had each found their own way to survive. David became quiet and withdrawn, disappearing into books and homework, building a wall around himself so high that no one could ever climb over it. Thomas went the other way. He became loud, angry, always fighting, always in trouble at school, always looking for someone to blame for the emptiness inside him. But Sarah, small, gentle, wide-eyed Sarah, she did something that neither of her brothers did. She watched, she observed. She noticed everything. She noticed the way the old woman at the end of the street always left a little extra bread on her windowsill. Not for the birds, but for the stray cats that wandered through the neighborhood. She noticed the way Mr. Henderson, the shopkeeper, would sometimes slip an extra apple into a child's bag when the mother wasn't looking. She noticed the small, quiet acts of kindness that happened every single day, in every single corner of the world, and that most people never saw. And she decided, somewhere deep inside her young heart, that she wanted to be that kind of person. The kind of person who noticed. The kind of person who gave, not because she had to. Not because someone told her to. But because it was the right thing to do. Because it made the world a little less cold. By the time Sarah was 8, she was already helping neighbors with their gardens, carrying groceries for old women, and sharing whatever small lunch she had with any child at school who looked hungry. And there were many. Millbrook was not a wealthy town. There were children everywhere who went to bed with empty stomachs, who wore shoes 2 sizes too small, who carried the weight of their family's poverty on their tiny shoulders without anyone ever noticing. Sarah noticed. Sarah always noticed. When Sarah was 12 years old, her mother left. There was no dramatic argument. No tearful goodbye. Margaret Moore simply woke up one morning, packed a small bag, and walked out the front door while the children were still asleep. By the time Sarah came downstairs, the only sign that her mother had ever existed was an empty coffee cup on the kitchen counter, and a faint smell of cigarette smoke hanging in the air. Sarah stood in the kitchen for a long time that morning, staring at the door. She did not cry. She had learned long ago that crying did not change anything. Instead, she took a deep breath, squared her small shoulders, and began making breakfast for her brothers. From that day on, Sarah became the mother of the household. She was 12 years old. She cooked, she cleaned, she made sure David and Thomas got to school on time. She applied for government assistance and somehow, despite being a child, managed to navigate the paperwork with a quiet determination that surprised even the social workers, who came to check on the household. She found a part-time job at a local bakery, waking up before dawn to knead dough and stack loaves before school started. The neighbors talked, of course. They always talked in Millbrook. Some of them pitied the Moore children. Others judged them, whispering that it was Margaret's fault. That the children were probably better off without her. That at least they still had a roof over their heads. A few kind souls brought over casseroles and offered to help, and Sarah accepted their kindness with a quiet, sincere gratitude that made grown men and women look away, uncomfortable with the depth of coming such a young face. But through all of it, through the poverty, the abandonment, the loneliness, the long nights when the house felt too empty and too cold, Sarah never lost the light inside her. It flickered sometimes, it dimmed, but it never went out. Because Sarah had decided, even before she understood what it truly meant, that she would not let the world's cruelty turn her into a cruel person. She would not pass on the pain she had received. She would absorb it. She would hold it quietly inside herself. And she would choose, every single day, to be kind. That decision, that quiet, stubborn, almost defiant decision, would define the rest of her life. 2P Part 2 The Waitress. Sarah finished school at 18. David had already left for college on a scholarship. His quiet, studious nature had finally paid off. Thomas had dropped out at 16 and disappeared in a life of bad decisions and worse company. Sarah worried about him constantly, called him when she could, sent him money she could not afford to spare. He rarely called back. With no money for college and no family to fall back on, Sarah got a job as a waitress at a small diner called the Morning Cup. It sat on the corner of Main Street and Oak Avenue, a modest little place with cracked vinyl booths, mismatched salt and pepper shakers, and a bell above the door that chimed every time someone walked in. The owner, an older woman named Dorothy, had run the diner for 37 years and had seen every kind of person walk through her doors. The happy ones, the sad ones, the desperate ones, the lonely ones. Dorothy hired Sarah on the spot. "You've got kind eyes," Dorothy told her on the first day, handing her an apron. "That's worth more than experience in this business." Sarah smiled, a small, warm smile that reached all the way to her eyes, and tied the apron around her waist. Working at the Morning Cup was not glamorous. The hours were long. The tips were small. The work was physically exhausting. On her feet from 5 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, carrying trays, refilling coffee cups, wiping down tables. Listening to the endless chatter of people who came in every single day, and told the same stories about the same things. Her feet ached by mid-morning. Her back screamed by noon. And by the time 2 o'clock came and she hung up her apron, she was so tired that sometimes she had to sit on the bench outside the diner for 10 minutes, before she could summon the energy to walk home. But Sarah loved it. She loved the routine, the predictability of it, the way each morning unfolded in the same quiet rhythm. Like a song she had memorized long ago and could play in her sleep. She loved the smell of freshly brewed coffee that greeted her every morning when she unlocked the back door. She loved the way the early light came through the windows and fell across the counter in long golden bars. She loved the warmth of the kitchen, the clatter of plates, the gentle hiss of the coffee machine. And she loved the regulars. She loved them the way you love the familiar characters in a story you have read 100 times. With fondness, with tenderness, with a deep and quiet appreciation for their presence in your life. Old Mr. Patterson, who came in every morning at exactly 6 o'clock and ordered black coffee and 2 slices of toast, and who always said, "Good morning, Sarah," in exactly the same tone, as if those 3 words were a ritual as important as breathing. Mrs. Chen, who always sat by the window and read the newspaper from front to back, turning the pages with the careful, deliberate movements of someone who was savoring every word. The young mother who came in every Tuesday with her toddler, looking exhausted and grateful for a cup of tea and 10 minutes of peace, and who always thanked Sarah with a smile that seemed to contain the entire weight of her kindness and her love for her child's. Sarah learned their names. She learned their stories. She learned what made them smile and what made them sad. What they were afraid of and what they were hoping for. What they had lost and what they were still holding on to. And she gave them something that was worth more than any meal on the menu. She gave them the feeling that someone saw them. Someone cared. Someone noticed that they existed. In a world where so many people go through their days feeling invisible, feeling unseen, feeling as though they could disappear, and no one would notice, Sarah gave them the simple, extraordinary gift of being noticed. Of being known. of being greeted by Nang with a warmth that was not performed but genuine. Because it was simply who Sarah was. After her shift ended each afternoon, Sarah would walk home a route that took her past the edge of town, where the houses became smaller and the streets became quieter. It was on this route, on a warm evening in early September, that everything changed. Fate Part 3: The Two Children. Sarah was 23 years old the first time she saw them. She had just finished a particularly long shift. One of the lunch rush servers had called in sick, and Sarah had covered for her, working a double without complaint. Her feet ached. Her back was sore. She was tired in that deep, bone-level way that comes from years of hard physical work with no rest. All she wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and sleep. She turned the corner onto Birch Lane and stopped. Sitting on the steps of the old Millbrook Orphanage, a gray, weathered building that had stood at the end of Birch Lane for over a century, were two children, a boy and a girl. The boy looked about 6 years old. The girl was maybe 4. They were sitting very close together, their small shoulders touching, as if they were trying to share whatever warmth they had between them. The boy had dark hair that fell across his forehead, and eyes that were too large for his thin face, the kind of eyes that had seen things no child should ever see. He was wearing a t-shirt that was too big for him, and his arms were wrapped around his knees, as if he was trying to make himself as small as possible. The girl was quieter than the boy. She sat beside him with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the ground with an expression that was not sadness exactly, but something deeper. Something that looked like resignation. As if she had already accepted that the world was not a kind place, and had simply decided to stop fighting it. Between them, on the concrete step, was a small plastic container. It was empty. Whatever had already been eaten, quickly, hungrily, desperately. The way children eat when they are not sure when their next meal will come. Sarah stood there for a long time, watching them. The evening light was fading. The air was getting cooler. Neither child moved. Neither child looked up. They simply sat there together in the gathering darkness, waiting for something that Sarah could not name, but could feel in her chest like a physical ache. She did not think about what she did next. She did not weigh the pros and cons. She did not wonder if it was her responsibility or if someone else would take care of it. She simply turned around, walked back to the morning cup Dorothy was just locking up, and asked if there was any food left from the day. Dorothy looked at her with those sharp, knowing eyes of hers. "For who?" she asked. "2 kids at the orphanage," Sarah said. "They look hungry." Dorothy did not hesitate. She opened the kitchen door and began filling 2 containers with whatever was left. A scoop of mashed potatoes, some leftover chicken, a handful of green beans, 2 bread rolls, and an apple each. She handed the containers to Sarah with both hands, the way you hand someone something precious. "Go on, then," Dorothy said softly. "And Sarah." Sarah turned back. "You're a good girl," Dorothy said. "Don't ever let the world change that." Sarah carried the 2 containers back to Birch Lane. When she rounded the corner, the 2 children were sitting on the steps, exactly where she had left them. The boy looked up first. His eyes went wide, not with excitement, but with wariness. The wariness of a child who has learned that strangers rarely bring good things. Sarah knelt down in front of them. She did not loom over them. She did not speak loudly or quickly. She simply held out the 2 containers, one in each hand, and smiled. "I thought you might be hungry," she said. Her voice was gentle, warm. The way you speak to something fragile that you don't want to break. For a moment neither child moved. The boy stared at the containers. The girl stared at Sarah. And then, slowly, carefully, the boy reached out and took one of the containers. He opened it. He looked at the food inside. And something happened in his face, something that Sarah would remember for the rest of her life. It was not a smile exactly. It was something more than a smile. It was a crack in the wall. A tiny, almost invisible crack in the armor that this child had built around himself to survive. And through that crack, Sarah could see the real boy underneath, the boy who still wanted to be loved. Who still hoped that someone in the world might care about whether he ate or not. The girl took the other container without a word. She opened it. She looked up at Sarah with those quiet, resigned eyes of hers. And then she did something that made Sarah's heart crack wide open. She said, "Thank you." 2 words, spoken in a voice so small, so sincere, so utterly without expectation, that Sarah had to look away for a moment to keep from crying. She stayed with them until they had finished eating. She did not talk much. She did not try to entertain them or make them laugh or fill the silence with empty chatter. She simply sat with them, on those cold concrete steps, and let them eat in peace. And when they were done, she took the empty containers, smiled at them one more time and walked home. That night, Sarah lay in her small bed, in her small apartment, and stared at the ceiling for a very long time. She thought about the boy's face when he opened the container. She thought about the girl's quiet, "Thank you." She thought about what it means to be hungry, truly, deeply hungry, and to have no one in the world who notices. And she made a decision. Feed Part 4 every single day. The next evening Sarah went back. She brought 2 containers of food. This time she had prepared them herself at home, using whatever she could afford from the grocery store. Rice, vegetables, a piece of bread. It was not much. But it was warm, and it was made with care, and that, Sarah believed, made all the difference. The children were sitting on the same steps in the same positions, as if they had not moved since the night before. When they saw Sarah walking towards them, something shifted in their faces. The boy's eyes widened just a fraction. The girl's lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something but was not sure she was allowed to. Sarah handed them the containers. They ate. She stayed. And when they were finished, she said good night and walked home. She went back the next night. And the night after that. Within a week, the children were expecting her. They would be sitting on the steps when she arrived, and sometimes, on the days when Sarah was running late, Sarah would round the corner and see them looking down the street, watching for her. Waiting, not with impatience, with hope, the quiet, fragile hope of children who have learned not to hope for too much, but who cannot quite bring themselves to stop hoping entirely. Sarah learned their names on the 5th night. The boy was called Oliver. The girl was called Lily. Oliver was 6. He had been at the orphanage for 2 years. Ever since his mother had died of an illness that no one could afford to treat. He had no father, or rather, he had a father somewhere. But the man had never shown any interest in his son and had disappeared long before Oliver was born. Oliver remembered his mother. But the memories were fading. The way memories do when you are very young. He remembered the smell of her hair. He remembered the sound of her laugh. He remembered the feeling of her arms around him at night, warm and safe. But the details were slipping away, like sand through open fingers. And Oliver was terrified that one day he would wake up and not remember her at all. Lily was 4. She had never known either of her parents. She had been left at a hospital when she was just hours old, wrapped in a thin blanket and placed in a bassinet with a small note that said only, "I'm sorry. I can't do this." Lily did not know what the note said. She was too young to read. But the nurses at the orphanage had read it. And they had looked at each other with sad eyes, and Lily had somehow sensed, the way children sense things, without words or explanations, that she had been given up. That she had not been wanted. That she had come into the world as an inconvenience to someone. It was a heavy thing for a 4-year-old to carry. And Lily carried it silently, the way she carried everything. With a quiet dignity that made the adults around her uncomfortable, because it reminded them that's not always innocent. That sometimes, the smallest people in the world are carrying the heaviest burdens. Sarah listened to their stories over the course of many evenings. She did not ask too many questions. She did not push. She simply made space for them to talk, and when they did, she listened with her whole heart, leaning forward slightly, her eyes warm and steady, her face open and attentive. Oliver talked more than Lily. He told Sarah about his day at school. About the other children at the orphanage, about the dreams he had at night. Some of the dreams were good. Many of them were not. Lily talked less. But when she did talk, it was with a precision and clarity that surprised Sarah. Lily said exactly what she meant, in exactly the words she needed to say it, and no more. It was as if she had decided, very early on, that words were precious things, and she was not going to waste them. One evening, about 3 weeks into Sarah's nightly visits, Lily looked up at her with those quiet, dark eyes and said, "Are you going to keep coming back?" It was not a hopeful question. It was not the question of a child who expected the answer to be yes. It was the question of a child who had learned, through painful experience, that people leave. That promises are broken. That the people who are supposed to take care of you often don't. It was a question born out of fear. The deep, quiet fear that this good thing, this warm thing, this thing that made the evenings a little less cold, was going to disappear. Sarah looked at Lily for a long moment. And then she said something that she meant every fiber of her being. "Yes," she said, "I'm going to keep coming back. Every single day. I promise." Lily studied her face for a long time, as if she was looking for the lie. Looking for the crack in the promise. Looking for any sign that this woman, this kind, warm, gentle woman, was just like all the others. Someone who would smile and say nice things and then one day, without warning, simply stop showing up. But she found no crack, no lie, no hesitation. She found only sincerity, deep, unwavering, absolute sincerity. And so Lily nodded, very slowly, and went back to eating her dinner. And Sarah kept her promise. Part 5 The Weight of Giving. People do not talk about what it costs to be a generous person. They talk about the beauty of giving. They talk about how it makes you feel good, how it fills your heart, how it is its own reward. And all with that is true. But they do not talk about the sacrifice. The quiet, daily, grinding sacrifice that generosity demands of the people who practice it. Sarah was not a wealthy woman. She earned barely enough to cover her rent, her food, and her basic expenses. Every dollar she brought home was accounted for. Every cent was needed, and yet, every single day, she set aside a portion of her grocery budget to buy food for Oliver and Lily. It was not a large amount. A few dollars a day at most. But a few dollars a day adds up. It adds up to skipped meals for herself. It adds up to wearing shoes with holes in the soles because she cannot afford to replace them. It adds up to choosing the cheapest brand of everything. Stretching every dollar as far as it will go, living on the razor's edge of poverty while quietly, invisibly, feeding 2 children who had no one else to feed them. Sarah never complained. Not to Dorothy, who sometimes slipped extra food into Sarah's bag at the end of her shift with a knowing smile. Not to the few friends she had, most of whom had no idea what she was doing. Not to anyone, she simply did it, day after day, month after month, year after year. She woke up in the morning, and went to work and came home, and cooked dinner for 2 children, who were not her own. And she sat with them on those cold steps, and listened to their stories. And she walked home alone in the dark. And she did it again the next day. Because that is what love looks like when no one is watching. It does not look heroic. It does not look heroic, it looks like a tired woman. After a long day of work, walking to a grocery store and carefully selecting the cheapest cuts of meat, and the freshest vegetables she can find. It looks like a woman standing in her small kitchen at 8 o'clock at night, stirring a pot of soup. Thinking not about herself but about 2 small faces that will light up when they see her coming down the street. It looks like a woman going to bed hungry so that 2 children can go to bed full. It looks like Sarah. There were nights when it was hard. Nights when Sarah's own loneliness pressed down on her like a physical weight, heavy and cold, settling into her chest and refusing to be moved. Nights when she sat on those orphanage steps and watched Oliver and Lily eat, and felt the full, crushing weight of her own emptiness. The emptiness of a life without a partner. Without a family of her own. Without anyone who loved her the way she loved these 2 children. She had spent so much of her life pouring her love outward, into the children she fed, into the customers she served, into the neighbors she helped. Into every small, quiet act of generosity that filled her days, that she had never stopped to notice how little of that love was flowing back to her. It was like a river that only ran in one direction. Water poured out, endlessly, freely. But nothing flowed back upstream. Nothing filled the well that she drew from every single day. And so the well, sometimes, ran dry, On those nights, the hard nights, the lonely nights, Sarah would lie in her small bed in her small apartment, and stare at the ceiling and wonder if she had made the right choice. Not the choice to feed Oliver and Lily. That choice she had never questioned, not for a single second. But the larger choice, the choice to live the way she lived. The choice to give so much of herself away that there was very little left for her own needs, her own desires for her own happiness. The choice to be alone. Because that was the truth that no one talked about when they spoke of kindness and generosity. The truth that no one put on greeting cards or wrote in inspirational quotes on the internet. The truth that Sarah knew, deep in her bones. Because she lived it every single day, being a generous person is lonely work. The people you give to move on with their lives. Carrying the gifts you gave them into a future that does not include you. And you stay behind, in the same small apartment, in the same worn shoes. With the same quiet emptiness that you have always had. Alone. It was lonely. And Sarah was lonely. And she would have been lying if she said it did not hurt. She had dated, once or twice, in her early 20s. A man named Richard who worked at the hardware store, and smiled at her in a way that made her stomach flutter. They had gone on a few dates. He had kissed her once, on a warm evening outside the Morning Cup. And for a few weeks Sarah had allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope that maybe she was not destined to be alone. Hope that maybe someone could love her, really love her, not because of what she did for them, but simply because of who she was. But Richard had not understood. When Sarah told him about Oliver and Lily, about the nightly visits, about the food, about the time and money she spent, his face had changed. Not dramatically. Not with anger or disgust. But with a subtle shift in expression that Sarah recognized immediately. It was the look of a man who was calculating. Who was looking at this woman he was interested in and adding up the costs. The time she spent. The money she gave away. The emotional energy she poured into two children who were not hers. And deciding that the math did not work out. That she was too complicated. Too giving. Too much. He had not said any of this, of course. He had simply stopped calling, and Sarah had understood with a quiet sadness that did not surprise her, that she was alone again. After Richard, Sarah stopped looking. Not out of bitterness. Not out of anger. But out of a calm, clear-eyed acceptance that the life she had chosen, the life of quiet, daily, invisible generosity, was not a life that most people could understand or accept. And she was not willing to change it. Not for anyone. So she stayed alone. And she kept feeding Oliver and Lily. And she kept telling herself, on the hard nights, that this was enough. That this mattered. That the world was a little less cold because of what she was doing, even if no one ever knew. Part 6. Oliver and Lily grow. The months turned into seasons. The seasons turned into years, and slowly, quietly, Oliver and Lily grew. Oliver turned 7, then 8. Then 9. He grew taller, his dark hair still falling across his forehead, his eyes still too large for his face but no longer quite so frightened. He became a serious, thoughtful boy, quiet in the way that children are quiet when they had spent a lot of time listening. He loved to read. Sarah brought him books, second-hand ones from the charity shop, worn and dog-eared. But full of stories that took him to places far away from Millbrook. Oliver read them hungrily, the way he had once eaten food quickly, desperately, as if he was afraid they might be taken away. Lily turned 5. Then 6. Then 7. She remained quieter than Oliver. But something in her began to change in the years that followed Sarah's visits. The resignation that had lived in her eyes, that deep, quiet acceptance that the world was not a kind place, began very slowly to fade. It did not disappear entirely, it never would. But it softened. It became less a statement and more a question. As if Lily was beginning to wonder, for the first time in her life, whether the world might be kinder than she had been taught to believe. Sarah watched them grow with a pride that was almost painful in its intensity. She watched Oliver discover a talent for mathematics. His mind was sharp, precise, capable of solving problems that left other children frustrated and confused. She would sit beside him on the orphanage steps, while he worked through his homework. And she would watch his face as he concentrated. The way his brow furrowed slightly, The way his lips moved as he worked through the numbers in his head. The way his eyes lit up when he found the answer. It was, Sarah thought, one of the most beautiful things she had ever seen. A child's mind. Opening up like a flower, petal by petal, revealing the extraordinary intelligence that had always been there, waiting to be nourished. She watched Lily begin to draw, small, careful sketches in the margins of her schoolbooks, of birds and flowers and the view from the orphanage steps. The drawings were surprisingly good. They showed a sensitivity to beauty that Sarah recognized instantly. Because it was the same sensitivity she carried inside herself. The ability to see the world not as it rushed past, but as it truly was, in all its quiet, ordinary, overlooked beauty. Lily drew the way Sarah gave, with care, with attention. With a reverence for the small things that most people walked right past without noticing. Sarah became more than just the woman who brought them food. She became a presence in their lives, a steady, reliable, unchanging presence in a world where everything else was uncertain. The orphanage was a place of constant flux. Children came and went. Staff members changed. The only thing that stayed the same, the only thing that Oliver and Lily could count on, day after day, without fail, was Sarah. Sarah with the food. Sarah with the smile. Sarah, always there, always warm, always kind. She helped Oliver with his homework. She sat with Lily while she drew. She took them for walks on sunny afternoons, pointing out the wildflowers growing along the roadside, the shapes of clouds in the sky, the way the light changed color, as the day moved towards evening. She taught them small things: how to tie a knot, how to tell the time, how to pick out the ripest apple at the grocery store. These were tiny lessons. Ordinary and unremarkable. But to Oliver and Lily, they were extraordinary. Because they were the kinds of lessons that parents teach their children. And for the first time in their lives, someone was teaching them. Someone was paying attention. Someone was bothering to show them the small, daily rituals of being alive. Oliver, in his quiet, serious way, began to understand what Sarah was doing for them. He began to understand that the food she brought was not free, that it cost her something, that she was sacrificing her own comfort, her own needs, to make sure that he and Lily were fed. He did not say anything about this understanding. He was not the kind of boy who spoke about his feelings easily. But one evening, when Sarah handed him his container, he looked at her with those large, dark eyes and said, "Thank you, Sarah, for everything." It was simple. It was sincere. And it broke Sarah's heart wide open, the way it had the first time Lily had said, on those cold steps all those years ago. 2. Fa-Fe Part 7. The years pass. 1 year became 2, 2 became 5, 5 became 10. Sarah kept every single day, rain or shine, sick or healthy, tired or wide awake. She never missed a day, not once in all those years. Did she fail to show up on those orphanage steps with 2 containers of food, and a smile that never wavered. The other people at the orphanage noticed, of course. The staff watched Sarah come and go with a mixture of curiosity and quiet admiration. Some of them tried to talk to her about it, to ask why she did it, what motivated her, whether she ever got tired of it. Sarah always answered the same way. She shrugged and smiled and said, "It's just what I do." Dorothy, at the morning cup, watched Sarah too. She watched the way Sarah's clothes wore thin and were never replaced. The way Sarah ate smaller and smaller portions of her own meals to make room in her budget for Oliver and Lily. The way Sarah came to work every morning looking tired but never complaining, never explaining, never asking for sympathy or praise. One afternoon, after the lunch rush had died down and the diner was quiet, Dorothy sat down across from Sarah in one of the empty booths. She looked at her for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "You know, most people in this world are takers, Sarah. They take and they never give back. But you're different. You give and you never ask for anything in return. And I worry about you sometimes. I worry that the world is going to eat you alive." Sarah looked at Dorothy with those kind, steady eyes of hers and smiled. "The world can't eat me alive, Dorothy," she said. "Because I've already given away the parts that matter most. And the parts I have left, the love, the hope, the belief that kindness is worth something, those parts are unbreakable." Dorothy shook her head slowly, a sad smile on her weathered face. "You're a saint, Sarah Moore," she said. "I'm not a saint," Sarah said quietly. "I'm just a person who remembers what it feels like to be hungry." Oliver turned 18. He graduated from high school with honors, the highest grades in his class, a scholarship to the state university, and a quiet, burning determination to make something of himself. On the night before he left for college, he sat on the orphanage steps one last time with Sarah and Lily. The evening was warm, the sky was full of stars, and for a while, none of them spoke. They simply sat together in the comfortable silence of people who have shared enough years to not need words. Then Oliver turned to Sarah and said something that she would carry with her for the rest of her life. "I want you to know something," he said. His voice was steady, but there was an emotion underneath it, a deep, raw emotion that he was trying very hard to control. "When I was 6 years old, I had given up. I had decided that the world didn't care about me. That nobody was ever going to come along and change that. And then you showed up. With 2 containers of food and a smile. And you changed everything." He paused. Swallowed hard. "I don't know where I would be without you, Sarah. I don't know what kind of person I would have become. But I know this, whatever I become, whatever I achieve, whatever good I do in this world, it will all be because of you. Because you showed me that someone cared. Because you showed me that kindness exists. Because you never stopped coming back." Sarah's eyes were full of tears. She did not try to hide them. She reached out and took Oliver's hand, this young man's hand, strong and capable now. So different from the small, thin hand she had first seen on those steps 15 years ago, and she squeezed it. "You did that yourself, Oliver," she said. "I just brought the food." Oliver shook his head. "No," he said. "You brought more than food. You brought hope, and hope is the most valuable thing in the world." He left the next morning. Sarah watched him go from the orphanage steps, standing beside Lily, who waved until Oliver's figure disappeared around the corner. And then Lily turned to Sarah and said, in that quiet, precise voice of hers, "He'll come back, won't he?" Sarah pulled her arm around the young girl's shoulders. "Wes," she said. "He'll come back." And he did. Lily turned 18 2 years after Oliver. She had grown into a quiet, talented young woman. Still not a person of many words, but a person whose silence spoke volumes. Her talent for drawing had blossomed into something extraordinary. She drew with a skill and sensitivity that took people's breath away, landscapes, portraits, still lifes, all rendered with a delicate, almost reverent attention to light and shadow and the small, quiet details that most people overlooked. Sarah had encouraged Lily's talent from the very beginning. She had bought her sketchbooks and pencils and colored pencils, even when she could barely afford them. She had taken her to the small art museum in the next town over, where they had spent hours standing in front of paintings. Sarah watching Lily's face as she studied each one, the way Lily's eyes moved slowly across the canvas, taking in every detail, absorbing the colors and the shapes and the emotion the way a sponge absorbs water. When Lily was accepted into an art school on a full scholarship, Sarah cried. She cried for a long time that night, alone in her small apartment, tears streaming down her face, but not tears of sadness. Tears of joy, tears of relief. Tears of gratitude for having been allowed to witness, up close, the transformation of a small, broken, abandoned child into a young woman of extraordinary talent and quiet strength. On the night before Lily left for art school, they sat on the orphanage steps one last time. The steps that had been the site of so many evenings together. So many meals shared, so many stories told, so many tears shed and wiped away. The steps that had become, over 15 years, the most sacred place in Sarah's world. Lily turned to Sarah and looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "Sarah." "Yes. I need you to really hear me." Sarah nodded. Lily took a breath. And then she spoke, slowly, carefully, choosing each word with the precision that had always defined her. "When I was 4 years old, I believed that no one in the world wanted me. That I had been given up because I was not worth keeping. That I would live and die without anyone ever loving me. And I had made peace with that. I had decided that it was simply the way things were, And that I would not waste my energy being sad about it. She paused. And then you came. And you sat down next to me. And you handed me a container of food. And you smiled at me. And in that moment, in that one small, simple moment, everything changed. Because for the first time in my life, someone had chosen me. Not because they had to. Not because it was their job. But because they wanted to. Because they saw me. Because they thought I mattered. Her voice cracked. Just slightly, on the last word. She took another breath and continued. You have given me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me, Sarah. And it wasn't the food. It was the knowing. The knowing that I was worth something. That I was loved. That someone in this world saw me and chose to stay. Sarah was crying now. She did not try to stop it. I will never forget what you did for me, Lily said. Never, and I promise you. I promise you on everything I have, that one day, I will find a way to show you what you mean to me. I don't know how yet. But I will. Sarah shook her head, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. You don't owe me anything, Lily, she said. You never did. Lily said. That's what makes it a gift. 2. Can't Feed Part 8. The Years of Silence. After Oliver and Lily left, Sarah's world became very quiet. The orphanage steps, which had been the center of her evenings for 15 years, were empty now. There were no small bodies sitting in the gathering dusk. No containers to fill, no stories to listen to, no quiet, thank you, spoken in voices that made her heart ache with tenderness. Sarah still walked past the orphanage on her way home from work. She did not stop. She simply walked past, glancing at the steps as she went, and continued on her way home to her small, quiet apartment. Dorothy retired from the morning cup when Sarah was 40. Before she left, she sat Sarah down one last time in their usual booth and pressed an envelope into her hands. What's this? Sarah asked. Little something, Dorothy said. For you. Not for anyone else, for you. Sarah opened the envelope. Inside was a check for $5,000, more money than Sarah had seen in one place in years. She stared at it, speechless. Dorothy, I can't. You can. Dorothy said firmly, and you will. You're going to use this money for yourself, Sarah. Not for anyone else. Do you understand me? Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Dorothy reached across the table and took Sarah's hands in hers. You have spent your whole life giving to others, she said. It's time someone gave something to you. Sarah used the money to pay off a year's worth of rent. It was the first time in her adult life that she had not had to worry, for at least a short while, about whether she could afford to keep a roof over her head. The relief she felt was so profound, so deep, that she sat alone in her apartment that night and privately, the way she did everything. The new owner of the Morning Cup kept Sarah on as a waitress. She was a younger woman, less perceptive than Dorothy. And she did not notice the way Sarah sometimes skipped her own lunch to save money, or the way Sarah's shoes wore through at the soles. Or the way Sarah smiled at every customer, with a warmth that had nothing to do with tips, and everything with the kind of person she was. The years passed. Sarah turned 35, then 40, then 45. She remained alone. She remained quietly, steadily generous. Not just with Oliver and Lily, who were gone now, but with anyone who crossed her path and needed something. A homeless man on the corner who got a warm meal every Tuesday. A young mother at the diner who got an extra slice of pie slipped onto her tray when she wasn't looking. A teenager working his first job who got a gentle word of encouragement when he was having a bad day. Sarah gave and gave and gave. And the world, for the most part, did not notice. But Oliver noticed, and Lily noticed. 2p Part 9. What Oliver and Lily were doing. Oliver had gone to the state university on a scholarship and had never looked back. He was brilliant, the kind of brilliant that is quiet and steady, not flashy or loud but deep and thorough and relentless. He studied business and finance with the same determined focus he had once brought to his schoolwork at the orphanage. He graduated at the top of his class. He got a job at a small investment firm. He worked 18-hour days, 6 days a week, and he saved every cent he could. Not because he was greedy. Because he remembered what it felt like to be hungry. Because he remembered Sarah's face, tired and kind, handing him a container of food at the end of her long day. Because he had promised himself, silently, on those orphanage steps. That he would never forget where he came from. And that he would find a way to repay the debt he could never truly repay. Oliver rose quickly in the world of finance. By his mid-30s, he was a senior analyst at one of the largest investment firms in the state. By his early 40s, he had started his own firm, small at first, then larger still. He had a gift for understanding markets, for seeing patterns that others missed, for making decisions under pressure with a calm, clear-eyed confidence that his colleagues both admired and envied. He was successful, he was wealthy. He lived in a large house on the outskirts of the city, drove expensive cars, wore expensive clothes. And every single year, on the anniversary of the night Sarah had first brought him food on those orphanage steps, he sat alone in his study, and thought about her. About the woman who had changed his life with 2 containers of food and a smile. The woman who had asked nothing in return. The woman who had simply quietly shown him that he mattered. But it was not only on the anniversary that Oliver thought about Sarah. He thought about her constantly, in ways both large and small, conscious and unconscious. He thought about her when he made a difficult business decision, and found himself asking, not, what is the most profitable choice? But, what is the right choice? Because that was what Sarah had taught him, without ever using those words. She had taught him that the right thing and the profitable thing were not always the same. That integrity mattered more than money. That the way you treated people, especially the people who could do nothing for you, was the truest measure of who you were. He thought about her when he saw a child on the street who looked hungry or scared or alone. Every fail, his heart would clench, his pace would slow. And he would think of those orphanage steps and the small boy he had once been, and the woman who had noticed him when no one else did, and he would do something. And he would do something. Buy the child a meal, slip some money to a parent who was struggling, make a donation to a charity that served families in need. These acts were invisible. No one knew he did them. Oliver did not do them for praise or recognition. He did them because Sarah had shown him what it looked like to give without expecting anything back. And he had carried that lesson with him every single day of his adult life. He thought about her when he donated money to charities, which he did regularly, quietly, without ever telling anyone, and wondered if Sarah knew how much of his generosity was rooted in hers. How much of the good he tried to do in the world was simply a reflection of the good she had done for him. How much of the man he had become was a direct result of the woman who had sat down beside him on concrete steps and handed him something warm to eat. Oliver had tried to find Sarah over the years. He had gone back to Millbrook several times, had asked around, had even hired someone to help him track her down. But Sarah had always been a private person, and Millbrook was a small town where people did not like to share information about their neighbors. The trail went cold, again and again, until Oliver eventually stopped searching, not because he had given up, but because he had decided to take a different approach. He would find her. But he would find her at the right time. When he had something worthy to give her. Something that would show her, truly show her, what she meant to him and to Lily. Something that would make the invisible visible. Something that would say, "We see you, Sarah, we have always seen you, and we will never stop seeing you." He began to plan. Lily, meanwhile, had become an artist of extraordinary talent and growing fame. Her paintings hung in galleries across the country. Critics praised her work for its emotional depth, its sensitivity, its ability to capture the quiet, overlooked moments of human life, a mother holding a sleeping child, an old man sitting alone on a park bench, 2 children sharing a meal on a set of cold concrete steps. Lily painted the way Sarah gave, with care, with attention, with a deep, almost reverent awareness of the beauty that existed in the ordinary. She did not paint grand landscapes or dramatic scenes. She painted the small things. The quiet things. The things that most people walk past without a second glance. A pair of hands wrapped around a cup of coffee on a cold morning. A child's shoe, untied, on a doorstep. An empty chair at a kitchen table, with the impression of someone still visible in the cushion. These were the things that moved Lily. The small, everyday moments that, if you looked closely enough, revealed the entire depth of human experience. Joy, grief, loss, despair, all of it. Living quietly inside the most ordinary moments of life. That last painting, the one of the two children on the steps, had become Lily's most famous work. It hung in the main hall of a prestigious art museum in New York. People stood in front of it for hours, moved by something they could not quite articulate. Something about the way the light fell on the children's faces. Something about the quiet tenderness in the scene. Something about the invisible presence that the painting seemed to suggest, a presence just outside the frame, just out of sight, but unmistakably there. A warmth. A care. A love that was not spoken but simply existed, radiating from the canvas like heat from a fire. Critics wrote about the painting in glowing terms. They called it meditation on invisible kindness, and a portrait of hope in its most quiet form. One reviewer wrote that standing in front of the painting felt like being wrapped in a blanket on a cold night, unexpectedly, overwhelmingly warm. Another wrote that it was the most honest painting of the decade. A reminder that the most powerful acts of love are often the ones no one else sees. Lily never told anyone the story behind the painting. She never explained who the two children were, or who the invisible presence was, or what the painting truly represented. She simply smiled when people asked. And said, "It's about someone I once knew. Someone who taught me that love doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just shows up quietly, with a warm meal and a smile." But privately, in her own heart, Lily knew exactly what the painting was about. It was about gratitude. It was about the debt that can never be repaid. It was about a woman named Sarah, who had changed two lives with nothing more than kindness. And who had never asked for a single thing in return. And Lily, like Oliver, had been planning. For years she had been planning. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting until she had something worthy to give. Not just a car, not just money, but something that came from the deepest part of herself. Something that would say, in the language Lily understood best, everything she could not say in words. Part 10. The Search. It took Oliver and Lily 3 years to find Sarah. They worked together on it, Oliver with his resources and his connections, Lily with her quiet determination, and her ability to read people. To sense things that others missed. They searched public records, contacted old neighbors in Millbrook, reached out to former employees of the Morning Cup. They followed every lead, no matter how small or unlikely. The trail that finally led them to Sarah was an unexpected one. It came through a woman named Mrs. Patricia Huang, who had worked at the Millbrook orphanage for 20 years, and was now retired. Oliver found her through a mutual connection and called her on a Tuesday afternoon. "I'm looking for a woman who used to visit the orphanage," he said. Her name was Sarah Moore. She used to bring food to some of the children there, every evening, for many years. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Patricia Huang said, in a voice thick with emotion, "Sarah Moore. Oh, I remember Sarah Moore. I remember her very well. Do you know where she is now?" Another silence. Then, "I might, but first I need to know something. Why are you looking for her?" Oliver hesitated. Then he said, "Because she saved my life. And I want to find a way to thank her." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I believe you. I can hear it in your voice. Give me few days, I'll see what I can do." 4 days later Patricia called back with an address. Sarah Moore, apartment 4B. Maple Street Apartments. Millbrook. Oliver called Lily immediately. They sat on the phone for hours talking about what to do. About how to find her. About what to say. About what to give her. In the end, they decided on something simple. Something that felt right. Something that would say without words everything they wanted to say. Part 11. The morning everything changed. Sarah woke up on a Thursday morning in early October. 15 years after she had first sat down on those orphanage steps with 2 containers of food and a smile. It was not a remarkable morning, at first. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale golden light through the curtains of her small apartment. Sarah stretched, got out of bed, and went through her usual routine: shower, coffee, a piece of toast, a quick glance in the mirror at the face that looked back at her. 43 years old now. A few lines around the eyes. A few threads of gray in her dark hair. But the same warm, kind expression she had always had. The same light in her eyes that had never gone out, no matter how hard the world had tried to extinguish it. She put on her shoes, the old ones, with the worn-down heels that she kept meaning to replace but never quite got around to, and opened the front door of her apartment. And stopped. Parked on the street below her building, directly in front of the entrance, was a car. Not just any car. A car that gleamed in the morning light like something out of a dream. It was a deep, midnight blue, the color of the sky just before dawn, and it was long and sleek and impossibly beautiful. A luxury car. The kind of car that Sarah had never imagined she would ever see up close, let alone standing in front of her own building. She stood on the steps of her apartment building and stared at it for a long time. Her coffee growing cold in her hand, her mind trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Cars like this did not appear in Millbrook. They did not appear on Maple Street. They certainly did not appear in front of a small, modest apartment building where a 43-year-old waitress lived alone. And then she saw the envelope. It was tucked under the windshield wiper, a cream-colored envelope, thick and heavy, with her name written on the front in a handwriting she did not recognize. She walked towards the car slowly, as if approaching something that might disappear if she moved too quickly. She reached out and took the envelope. Her hands were trembling slightly. She did not know why. She opened it. Inside was a letter. A long letter, written in two different hands, one firm and precise, the other delicate and flowing. And beside the letter was a set of keys. A single key on a simple silver ring, with a small tag that said Far Sere. Sarah sat down on the steps of her apartment building, the same way she had once sat on the orphanage steps, years ago, with two small children beside her, and began to read. The first part of the letter was written by Oliver. Dear Sarah, my name is Oliver. You might not remember me. I was 6 years old the first time you brought me food on the steps of the Millbrook orphanage. I was hungry, and scared. And I had given up hope that anyone in the world cared whether I lived or died. And then you came. With 2 containers of food and a smile. And everything changed. I am writing this letter 15 years after that night. 15 years of thinking about you. 15 years of wondering how to say thank you for something that words cannot capture. 15 years of trying to understand what you did for me and Lily. Not just the food, though the food mattered more than you know. But the presence. The consistency. The quiet daily, unwavering proof that someone in this world cared about us. You gave us something that no one else could give us. You gave us hope. You gave us the belief that we were worth something. That we mattered. That the world, for all its cruelty, still contained people who would choose kindness over convenience, love over comfort, generosity over self-interest. I have spent the last 15 years building a life. A successful life by most measures. I have money, I have a company. I have everything that the world considers important. And none of it, not a single piece of it, would exist without you. Because you were the one who showed me that I could become something. That I deserved to become something. That the boy on the orphanage steps was not destined to stay there forever. This car is not a payment, Sarah. You cannot pay for what you did for us. It is not a reward. You did not do what you did because you expected something in return. It is simply a small, inadequate gesture, a way of saying I see you. I know what you did. And I will never, ever forget it. Please accept it. Not because you deserve it, though you do, more than anyone I have ever known. But because you deserve to be seen. You deserve to know that the kindness you showed us rippled outward, touching lives and changing the world in ways you could never have imagined. With all the love and gratitude I have, a liver. 2. Sarah was crying before she finished Oliver's portion of the letter. Silently, the tears streaming down her face, pooling on the cream-colored paper in her lap. She did not wipe them away. She simply let them fall, and kept reading. The second part of the letter was written by Lily. Dear Sarah, my name is Lily. I was 4 years old the first time you sat down beside me on the orphanage steps. I did not say much that night. I never say much. But I want you to know what was happening inside me in that moment. Even though I was too young to put it into words. I had believed, before you came, that I was unwanted. That I had been given up because I was not worth keeping. That the world had looked at me and decided that I was not enough. And then you came. And you handed me a container of food. And you smiled at me. And in that one moment, that one small, quiet moment, you told me something that no one had ever told me before. You told me that I was worth something. That I mattered. That someone in this world had seen me, and had chosen to stay. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. And I have spent my entire life, my art, my work, everything I do, trying to honor it. Trying to show the world what it looks like when someone chooses kindness. When someone chooses to give, not because they have to, but because it is who they are. I painted a picture once, a picture of two children sitting on a set of steps, sharing a meal. It is the most famous painting I have ever made. People stand in front of it in museums and cry. Though they do not always know why. They cry because they recognize something in it. Something true. Something rare. Something that they have felt in their own lives perhaps, but have never been able to name. That something is you, Sarah. That something is the kindness you showed us. The quiet, daily, invisible kindness that changed 2 lives and, through those 2 lives, touched countless others. Oliver and I have talked about this for a long time. About how to say thank you. About what to give you. About how to honor what you did for us in a way that feels worthy of it. And in the end, we decided that the best thing we could do was simply to let you know. To make sure you knew that your kindness was seen. That it mattered. That it made a difference. The car is Oliver's idea. I wanted to give you something else. Something that I think might even more to you than a car. And so I am including, with this letter, something I have never shown to anyone before. A painting. It is at the Millbrook Art Gallery on Main Street. They are holding it for you under your name. When you are ready, go and see it. And know that it is my way of saying I see you, Sarah. I have always seen you. And I will never stop seeing you. With all the love I have, Lily. Parfait Part 12, The Gallery. Sarah sat on the steps of her apartment building for a very long time, after she finished reading the letter. The car gleamed in front of her. The keys sat in her lap. The letter was clutched in her hands, now wet with tears, the ink slightly smudged where her tears had fallen. She did not move for almost an hour. She simply sat there, in the pale morning light, and let the words wash over her. Let the gratitude wash over her. Let the overwhelming, almost unbearable knowledge that she had mattered, that her small, quiet, daily act of kindness had changed 2 lives, had rippled outward in ways she could never have imagined, settle into her bones. Eventually, when the tears had stopped and the morning sun had fully risen, Sarah stood up. She looked at the car one more time, this beautiful, impossible, midnight blue car that had appeared out of nowhere. Like a gift from the universe itself. And then she looked at the keys in her hand. And then she looked at the letter. And at the bottom of the letter, in Lily's delicate handwriting, was an address. The address of the Millbrook Art Gallery on Main Street. Sarah put the letter in her pocket. She put the keys in her other pocket. And she walked. 2. The Millbrook Art Gallery was a space on the corner of Main Street, not far in fact, from where the Morning Cup had once stood. It had opened about 5 years ago. Run by a young woman named Claire who had a passion for local art, and a gift for creating a space that felt warm and welcoming. The walls were painted a soft cream color. The floors were polished wood. Soft music played from hidden speakers, nothing loud, nothing distracting. Just a gentle background of classical piano that made the whole space feel like a sanctuary. Sarah had been inside once or twice, years ago, browsing without any particular purpose. She had admired some of the paintings but had never felt a strong pull towards any of them. Art, for Sarah, had always been something that belonged to other people's worlds. The worlds of people who had time and money and leisure, none of which Sarah had in abundance. She had never bought a painting for herself. She had never hung anything on her walls, except a small calendar and a faded photograph of Dorothy, taken on the day she retired from the Morning Cup. But today was different. Today Sarah walked into the gallery with a purpose. She went to the front desk, where Claire was arranging a display of watercolors, and said, "I'm looking for a painting. Sarah Moore." Claire looked up. Something flickered in her expression, recognition, perhaps, or surprise. She had been told about this painting. She had been told about the woman it was for. She had been given very specific instructions to hold it, to keep it safe, and to wait. "Oh," she said. "It's here. It arrived 2 days ago. With a note saying it was for you." She led Sarah to the back of the gallery, to a room that Sarah had never been in before. It was a small room, set apart from the rest of the gallery, as if it existed in its own separate world. It was lit by soft, warm light. The kind of light that makes everything look golden, that softens edges, that makes the ordinary feel sacred. There were no other paintings in it. No benches. No plaques, no information cards. Just one painting hanging on the far wall in a simple wooden frame. Sarah stopped in the doorway. The painting filled the wall in front of her, not because it was physically large, but because it was so vivid, so alive, so present that it seemed to expand beyond its frame and fill the entire room. It was a painting of 2 children sitting on a set of concrete steps. A boy and a girl, sitting close together, their shoulders almost touching. The boy had dark hair falling across his forehead and large, watchful eyes. Eyes that Sarah knew. Eyes she had looked into 1,000 times on 1,000 evenings. The girl was smaller, quieter. With her hands folded in her lap, and an expression on her face that was not quite sadness and not quite peace, but something in between. Something that Sarah recognized as the face Lily had worn the very first night they had met, all those years ago. Between them, on the step, were 2 small containers of food. They were rendered in such careful, loving detail, the slight dent in one lid, the way the condensation caught the light, that Sarah could almost feel the warmth radiating from them. And just at the edge of the painting, just barely visible, as if she had stepped into the frame only a moment before, was the hand of a woman. A warm, kind hand, reaching out towards the children. Open, offering, giving. Present, it was her hand. Sarah knew it instantly. She knew the shape of her own fingers, the slight callus on her palm from years of carrying trays. The small scar on her thumb from a kitchen knife when she was 14. Lily had painted it from memory, from 15 years of memory, and she had captured it perfectly, every detail, every line, every small, quiet mark that life had left on Sarah's hands. Sarah stood in front of the painting for a very long time. The tears came again, quietly, as they always did with Sarah, and she did not try to stop them. She simply stood there, in the golden light, looking at the 2 small faces she had loved for 15 years. Rendered in oil and pigment with such extraordinary care and tenderness that they seemed almost alive. Almost breathing. Almost about to look up and smile at her, the way they used to smile when they saw her, coming down the street with food in her hands. And at the bottom of the painting, in small, careful letters, was a title. 2 words. 2 simple, perfect words that said everything Lily had wanted to say. Everything that no amount of money or cars or letters could ever fully express. She stayed. Sarah read the words. And something broke open inside her. Something that had been held together tightly for a very long time. Something that had been held together by duty and habit and the quiet, stubborn belief that what she did not matter, that no one noticed, that the world would keep turning whether she kept giving or not. That something broke open, and what poured out was not sadness, it was relief, pure, overwhelming, almost unbearable relief, the relief of being seen, of being known, of being told, after decades of quiet, invisible giving, that it had mattered, that she had mattered, that the small, gaily unremarkable act of showing up, day after day, year after year, with nothing but food and a smile and a heart full of love, had changed the world in ways she could never have imagined. Part 13. The phone call. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment with the letter in her lap, and the keys to the car on the table in front of her. She had not driven the car yet. She was not sure she was ready to. It still felt too large, too impossible, too much like a dream to be real. But the painting was real. She had stood in front of it for over an hour, memorizing every detail, letting the emotion wash through her like a tide. And when she had finally turned to leave, Claire had said, "The painting is yours, Ms. Moore. They wanted you to have it." Sarah had nodded, unable to speak. And she had walked home in a daze, the letter in her pocket, the tears still drying on her cheeks. Now, sitting in her apartment, she looked at the bottom of the letter one more time. Below Lily's signature, there was a phone number. And beside it, a single line: "Call us when you're ready. We'd love to hear your voice." Sarah picked up the phone. Her hands were trembling again. She dialed the number slowly, carefully, as if each digit was a sacred thing. It rang once, twice. And then a voice answered, a voice that Sarah recognized instantly. Even though it had changed so much since the last time she had heard it. It was deeper now, more mature, but it still had that quality she remembered. That quiet, precise clarity. That careful choice of words. "Hello," said Lily. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She simply held the phone to her ear and listened to the sound of Lily's breathing on the other end of the line. And then, very quietly, she said, "Lily." There was a long silence. And then Lily said, in a voice that was no longer the voice of a quiet, resigned child on orphanage steps, but the voice of a woman who had found her own strength, her own worth, her own place in the world. "Hi Sarah. It's been a long time." "It has," Sarah said. Another silence, and then Lily said, "Did you see the car?" "I did. And the painting?" Sarah's voice broke just slightly. "I saw the painting, Lily. It's the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." "Good," Lily said softly. "Because it's for you. All of it is for you. The car, the painting, the letter. All of it." "I don't know what to say," Sarah whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Lily said. "You already said everything you needed to say. 15 years ago, when you sat down on those steps with 2 containers of food and a smile. Everything else is just us saying it back." They talked for 3 hours that night. Oliver joined the call halfway through. And the 3 of them talked the way people talk when they have so much to say and so many years of silence to fill. All at once. Over each other. Laughing and crying and remembering and thanking and simply being together, across the miles. In the way that people who share a deep bond can be together even when they are far apart. When the call ended, Sarah sat alone in her apartment and looked at the keys on the table. And for the first time in a very long time she smiled. Not the quiet, gentle smile she gave to customers at the diner. Not the warm, encouraging smile she gave to strangers who needed a little kindness. But a smile that was for herself. A smile that said, "You did good, Sarah. You lived well, you mattered." Q Part 14. What can this really costs? The story of Sarah Moore is not a fairy tale. It does not have a neat, tidy ending where everything falls into place and the good person is rewarded and the world makes sense at last. Life does not work that way. And Sarah would have been the first person to tell you so. Sarah did not become wealthy because of the car. She did not suddenly find love or fame or recognition. She did not transform from a quiet, struggling waitress into something extraordinary. She had been extraordinary for years, for decades, and the world, for the most part, had simply not noticed. The car sat in the parking lot outside her apartment for 3 days before Sarah worked up the courage to drive it. When she finally did, she sat behind the wheel for 20 minutes before turning the engine on, simply running her hands over the steering wheel. Feeling the smooth leather under her fingertips, marveling at the quiet absurdity of her situation. A woman who had spent 15 years sacrificing her own comfort to feed 2 orphan children. Now sitting in a car that cost more than she would earn in 5 years of waitressing. She drove it to work the next day. Dorothy's old diner, now under new management, was still open, and Sarah still worked there, same as she always had. When she pulled into the small parking lot behind the building, the other employees stared. A luxury car, in Millbrook, driven by Sarah Moore. The quiet waitress who wore shoes with holes in the soles, and never complained about anything. Sarah simply smiled and went inside to start her shift. Over the following weeks, Sarah made a decision. She did not sell the car. She did not keep it for herself either, not entirely. She began using it to drive to the next town over, where there was a food bank that served hundreds of families every week. she volunteered there on her days off, helping to sort donations, pack boxes, and distribute food to the families who came through empty hands and desperate eyes. And sometimes, on her way home from the food bank, she would drive past the Millbrook orphanage. She would slow down as she passed it, looking at the steps where she had once sat with Oliver and Lily. The steps where everything had begun. And she would think about all the children who were sitting on those steps right now, hungry, scared, alone, waiting for someone to notice them, waiting for someone to care. And sometimes, not every day, but sometimes, Sarah would stop the car, go back to the grocery store, and buy 2 containers of food, and she would walk up to the orphanage and sit down on those steps and wait. Because that is who Sarah was. That is who she had always been. The world could give her cars and paintings and letters full of gratitude, and she would accept them with grace and humility and tears in her eyes. But it could not change who she was at her core. It could not change the quiet, stubborn, almost defiant belief that kindness was the most important thing in the world. That seeing people, really seeing them, really noticing them, really choosing to show up for them, was the most valuable gift one human being could give to another. Sarah Moore was not a saint. She was not perfect. She was a tired, lonely, sometimes sad woman who had made a choice, long ago, to be kind in a world that did not always reward kindness. And she had stuck with that choice, day after day, year after year, through hardship and loneliness and sacrifice, without ever asking for anything in return. And in the end, in the quiet, imperfect, beautiful end, the world had seen her. Not because she had done something dramatic or spectacular. Not because she had become famous or powerful or rich. But because the lives she had touched had grown up, and had found their own voices, and had spoken on her behalf, with a car, and a painting, and a letter, and a phone call on a quiet evening in October. And that, perhaps, is the truest measure of a life well lived. Not what you accumulate, not what you achieve, not what the world thinks of you, but the quiet, invisible, rippling effect of the kindness you showed to the people who needed it most. 2. Carfi Part 15. What the world does not see. There are people in this world who will never make the news. They will never trend on social media. They will never be the subject of a viral story or a viral video. They will never have monuments built in their honor or statues erected in public squares. They will live and they will die, and the world will barely notice that they were ever here. And yet, and this is the quiet, extraordinary truth that most of us spend our entire lives failing to understand, these are often the people who change the world the most. They change it not with grand gestures or dramatic acts. They change it with the small things. The daily things. The things that no one sees and no one records and no one remembers, except the people whose lives are touched by them. A warm meal handed to a hungry child at the end of a long day. A kind word spoken to someone who has not heard a kind word in months. A hand extended to someone who is drowning, not with fanfare or heroism, but with the quiet, simple act of noticing that they are struggling and choosing to help. Sarah Moore was that kind of person. She was not special because she was rich or famous or talented or powerful. She was special because she was kind. Consistently, daily, quietly, invisibly kind. In a world that rewards loudness and spectacle and self-promotion, Sarah, a woman who gave without announcing it. Who loved without expecting anything back, who showed up, day after day, year after year, for 2 children who needed her. And who never once asked the world to notice what she was doing. And the world, for a very long time, did not notice. But the children she fed grew up. And they became people. Real people, with voices and influence and the ability to tell the story that Sarah had never told herself. And when they told it, through a letter, through a painting, through a phone call on a quiet evening, the world finally began to see what had been there all along. A woman on a set of orphanage steps, handing 2 containers of food to 2 hungry children. And sitting down beside them in the gathering dark, and staying. Simply staying. Because that is what love looks like when it is not trying to be noticed. That is what kindness looks like when it is real. The years that followed were not dramatically different for Sarah. She did not become famous. She did not become wealthy. She did not move to a big house or travel the world, or do any of the things that the stories that tell ourselves about, happy endings, usually include. What changed was quieter than all of that. What changed was inside. For the first time in her life, Sarah Moore knew with absolute certainty, in the deepest and most unshakable part of herself, that she had mattered. That the life she had lived, the choices she had made, the years she had spent giving more than she had to give, had not been wasted. Had not gone unnoticed. Had not disappeared into the void. They had been seen. They had been felt. They had rippled outward, touching lives and changing hearts and setting in motion a chain of events that would continue long after Sarah herself was gone from this world. Oliver would go on to build one of the most generous companies in the country. A company that donated millions of dollars every year to orphanages, food banks, and programs that served children in need. When people asked him why, he always gave the same answer. Because someone once gave me something when I had nothing. And I have never forgotten what that felt like. Lily would go on to create some of the emotionally powerful art of her generation. Art that made people stop and look and feel and remember the quiet moments of their own lives of they had been too busy to notice. Every painting she made carried, somewhere within it, the echo of Sarah's kindness. The echo of a warm meal on a cold evening. The echo of a woman who had chosen to stay. And Sarah would go on being exactly who she had always been, a waitress, a giver, a quiet, steady, unremarkable woman who noticed the people that the world overlooked. And who chose every something about it. She was not a saint. She was not a hero. She was simply a person who had learned, early and painfully, what it felt like to be unseen, and who had decided, with a stubbornness that nothing in the world could shake, that she would never let another person feel that way if she could help it. That was Sarah Moore's legacy. Not the car, not the painting, not the letter, but the quiet daily invisible choice to be kind, to be present, to show up, to stay. On a warm evening the following spring, Sarah drove the midnight blue car to the edge of town and parked it on the street, outside the Millbrook orphanage. She sat behind the wheel for a moment, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink and violet. The colors were extraordinary. The kind of colors that make you stop and stare and forget, for a moment, everything else in the world. Sarah watched them for a long time. Her hands resting loosely on the steering wheel, her heart full of a quiet, warm peace that she had not felt in years. Then she got out of the car, walked up to the steps and sat down. The steps were empty. No children were sitting there tonight. The orphanage was quiet. The kind of quiet that settles over a place at the end of a long day, when the noise and the pace and the constant demands of childhood have finally worn down, and the world is still. But Sarah did not mind the emptiness. She had brought 2 containers of food just in case. Just in case someone was hungry. Just in case someone needed to know that they were seen. She set them down on the step beside her, the way she had done 1,000 times before. And she leaned back and looked up at the sky. The stars were beginning to appear, faint at first, then brighter, one by one. Like tiny lights being switched on in an enormous, dark room. Sarah watched them appear and thought about all the nights she had sat on these very steps, under these very stars, with Oliver and Lily beside her. She thought about the way Oliver's face used to look in the starlight, serious and thoughtful, his dark eyes reflecting the sky above them. She thought about the way Lily used to lean against her shoulder, silently, trusting, as if Sarah's presence alone was enough to make the world feel safe. She thought about all the things she had given them over the years. The food, of course. But also the time, the attention, the quiet companionship. The steady, unwavering proof that someone in the world cared whether they lived or died. Whether they ate or went hungry, whether they were happy or sad or frightened or lost. She had given them all of these things, freely and without reservation. And she had never once regretted a single moment of it. And now, sitting on these steps in the warm spring evening, with the car gleaming behind her, and the painting waiting for her at the gallery and Oliver and Lily's voices, still echoing in her memory from that phone call weeks ago, Sarah felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt complete. Not because the world had finally noticed her. Not because she had been rewarded for her kindness with a luxury car, and a beautiful painting and 2 letters full of gratitude. But because she had lived the life she was meant to live. She had followed the quiet, stubborn pull of her own heart. Day after day, year after year. Through loneliness and poverty and sacrifice, and she had become the person she was always meant to become. A person who gave. A person who stayed. A person who saw the invisible and chose to make them visible, one warm meal at a time. She sat there for a while, in the warm evening air, listening to the birdsong and the distant sound of children playing somewhere down the street. And she thought about Oliver, who was somewhere in the city, building his empire, living the life that had begun on these very steps. And she thought about Lily, who was somewhere in a studio, painting the world with the extraordinary talent that had been born in silence and quietness and the slow, patient belief that beauty existed even in the darkest places. And she thought about Dorothy, who had given her a job and a kind word when she needed both. And she thought about all the small, quiet moments that had brought her to this place, this exact spot, on this exact evening, in this exact life. And she smiled. Not because everything was perfect. Not because the world had finally made sense. But because she had lived a life that mattered. A life of small, quiet, daily kindness. A life that had touched other lives, and changed them. And set in motion a chain of events that she could never have predicted, and would never fully understand. She sat on those steps until the sun went down. And then she drove home in her midnight blue car, under a sky full of stars, carrying with her the quiet, unshakable knowledge that she had done what she had come into this world to do. She had fed 2 orphans. She had shown them that they mattered. And in doing so, she had shown the world something that it desperately needed to see. That kindness is never wasted. That love, even when it is quiet and small and invisible, has the power to change everything. And that sometimes, the universe finds a way to say thank you. For every Sarah Moore in the world, the quiet ones, the invisible ones, the ones who give without expecting anything in return, this story is for you. You matter more than you know.